Again, I was just going in order, kind of recapping, and you missed my summary of yours, Julie. I apologize for that, but I thought I should do it anyway. Dawn, again brought up the issue of technology, and he used the phrase "change for the better" and "change for the worse." I mean that he could see both kinds of changes happening. It isn't that life. Charles Dickens opens A Tale of Two Cities was, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And when I first read that in high school, I didn't understand what that meant because I was too young. And now I'm 47 and I understand how it can be the best of times and the worst of times all at the same time. Dawn also talked about people forgetting where they've come from. And so I think this is a particular problem that was discussed in some of the panel yesterday. About we're a nation of immigrants, essentially, but there's this whole pull the ladder up dynamic where you've gotten over the wall and now that's all that's important, and now keep all the rest of these folks out because God forbid they come in. And yesterday it was discussed that Benjamin Franklin's comment was read about if we let these people in, they're going to destroy the fabric of American society, and these people were the Germans. So that kind of xenophobia and kind of crude nativism has been, part of our society for quite a while. Dawn also brought up, the diversity of the Houston community, and I think we also, we have to, thinking of media and other things, we have to kind of treasure, the gifts that we have, and try to, reinforce the goodness of all that and support it, in any way we can. Dawn also talked about, how, which is related to, these technology issues that Lisa first brought up in her presentation, about how, the media world that he's most primarily involved with, it finds itself to be very reactive, to what people want or what's happening, and it's good for us to be sensitized to the fact that that's a real challenge for any journalist to deal with. How can you cover something and not be driven by the forces that are swirling around you, which aren't always, the best forces, and the noblest of forces. Dawn brought up the issue of the Houston, the plane crash and the Houstonians on it, and I thought I'd respond to that, and then summarize Rick's, and then open it up to a conversation. I think in a case like that, Dawn, the journalist asks herself or himself the question, or ought to ask himself or herself the question, are there compelling reasons not to treat this as a largely local story? And I think in the case of the plane crash, probably not. I mean, plane crashes are horrible, and they're, but really, if there are a lot of Houstonians, on that plane, that's what, it's not even going to be carried in some other markets, I mean, you might get a little blurb on it. So if you ask yourself, are there compelling reasons not to treat this as Houstonian? I think the answer could be fairly no. I mean, there are no compelling reasons to focus on all the other people who got injured in this event, because it's going to be superfluous, really, I mean, to what your audience is expecting. I think the answer is yes in the Mumbai case, you see, if you ask that question. And it has a number of critical elements. One is that Muslims, and this is what a lot of people in the United States don't know, Muslims are the primary victims of terrorism done in the name of Islam. More Muslims by far die as a result of violence done in the name of Islam than non-Muslims do, you see. And so what we call terrorism is so much more a problem actually in the Muslim world than it is in the West. And once we start realizing that, we can begin to realize other things, like what are the sociological and socio-political causes for the rise of this kind of violence in different parts of the Muslim world. And then that will begin to get us not to try to look at something in the religion that's causing this, but something in the structures of those societies that is oppressive and that is resulting in some of this kind of activity. Another element of the fact that the answer should be there are compelling reasons to treat this as a global issue in the case of Mumbai is that the attack, interestingly enough, was not a global one in the sense that 9/11 was. Now, here's what I mean by that. What I mean is Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is probably the South Asian terrorist organization that was responsible for the attacks in Mumbai, is not Al-Qaeda. Now, I'm not saying one's necessarily worse or better than the other, but Lashkar-e-Taiba is dealing with relatively local South Asian issues, particularly the controversy over Kashmir. Okay, and that's all about people being displaced and people feeling like they're being disenfranchised, and there are all kinds of power and justice issues, around that. And Al Qaeda is a very different kind of organization. So how does this play in? Well, the attacks in Mumbai were all about India, and all about Muslims in India, and all about India and Pakistan. So to spend too much time focusing on the Americans that happen to be there and that might be, victims in this is again probably losing the focus that the story needs to have in order for people to understand what's going on.
Hi, I have a question, and this is for the commercial journalists up there. With the resources being so tight at the media, what can the Muslim Middle East community do to educate the media? Public relations campaigns, press releases. So instead of when there's an issue, I often see media people interviewing other media people, and I think, why aren't you talking to the horse? How can the horse get the information, the nonprofits that represent the Muslim community, what have you, how can they get that information to you guys?
We know you now. We know about the Institute and Kamal and others who have come to the station because we look for experts and spokespeople, depending on what the news of the day may be. So I think you're right, getting away from it being, although we are still largely reactive, when there's something to react to know where to go to bring the microphone. So I think that has to be an ongoing process where you come in and you meet and you introduce and you say when you're looking for an expert on, if you agree on certain key things or you offer up your experts is one thing. And then the second thing is I think you join the groups that are here in Houston and that are the larger fabric of the city in terms of the Greater Houston Partnership or some of these other things where you can be talking about and people can get to know you as people in our community for the larger whole of Houston, as I think is important because the less we can focus on the labels of who we are and the more we can focus on the common good, education, I think we'll start to improve the words we use and how we treat each other. That's just a couple of ideas.
One other thing I think that's maybe relevant to this conversation has to do with the question of professionalism and organization. The Muslim community in the United States is varied to the degree to which it's organized professionally. I mean, most of the Islamic centers in the United States have 100% volunteer staff. They don't have the money yet to necessarily hire, even a full-time imam. Many places have different people that function as imams. They may have been able to build a center or buy or rent a building, but that's the nature, of the development of the Muslim community right now in the United States. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it can be an extreme liability for the Muslim community to have every Tom, Dick, Harry, Mariam, Hamza, whatever, flooding news stations, for instance, editorial desks with requests to do stories. And sometimes, depending on who those individuals are, the whole thing can backfire if what you're looking for is balanced representation. Because, we all have in our communities, I know I have them in mine, people that would be lovingly referred to as nut jobs. And those shouldn't be the people, I don't think, talking to the media. And ideally, I work for an institution which has a marketing and communications department, and even though I have some experience working with media and I think I understand some of the workings of the media, I prefer to go through my colleague who's the director of communications because she comes from the media. She understands both worlds. She understands the world of Catholic Theological Union and what we're trying to do, who's on the faculty, who can speak to certain issues, and she understands, she's got simpatico with journalists because she's been there herself. So